The soft murmur of conversation drifted through the first-class cabin, blending with the quiet hum of the engines warming up outside. The flight from Dallas to Los Angeles, scheduled for 10:45 p.m., was the kind of late departure where passengers moved with practiced familiarity, adjusting leather seats, flipping through dinner menus, and exchanging brief nods of acknowledgement. It was a flight of executives and seasoned travelers, a space where everything felt predictable, where no one expected the unexpected. Then Chuck Norris appeared in the doorway, and the balance shifted ever so slightly. There was no grand entrance, no fanfare or announcement. Just a man in his early 80s, wearing a well-worn leather jacket and faded jeans, carrying a simple black duffel bag over his shoulder. Most passengers recognized him instantly. His signature beard, now silver with age, was unmistakable. His presence carried a quiet weight, a gravity that seemed to settle over the cabin. He moved with measured grace, each step deliberate, each glance keenly aware of his surroundings. As he made his way to seat 3F, passengers stole glances. A young boy pointed excitedly, only to be gently hushed by his father. Others whispered behind strategically raised magazines or pretended to be deeply absorbed in their phones while stealing glances. Chuck acknowledged them with a slight nod, his expression neutral and contemplative. He adjusted his seat and settled in with the ease of a man who had spent countless hours on planes. As he moved, the sleeve of his jacket pulled back slightly, revealing an old watch on his wrist. A watch that would soon spark a conversation no one on that flight would forget. Seated in 3D, directly across the aisle, was a young tech executive, a man Silicon Valley churned out by the dozen. Barely 35, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and the latest Apple Watch Ultra, he exuded the kind of confidence that came from too much success too quickly. He had been engrossed in his MacBook Pro, orchestrating a multi-million-dollar deal over Slack, when Chuck had taken his seat. But now, his attention kept drifting to Chuck's wrist. That watch. It was old, worn, scratched, a relic of another era. It didn't belong in first class, not in a world of titanium and smart displays. At first, his glances were subtle, quick darting looks between email responses. But as the minutes ticked by, his focus became more obvious. His expression shifted from curiosity to something closer to disdain. He adjusted his own watch, tilting his wrist just enough to catch the cabin lighting, making the titanium gleam. A flight attendant passed by, and he caught her eye, tilting his head toward Chuck's watch with a silent, bemused question. The flight attendant hesitated, her professional smile faltering for just a moment before she moved on. The executive pulled out his phone, scrolling through luxury watch websites, occasionally glancing at Chuck's timepiece with an increasingly puzzled expression. His fingers tapped against the armrest, his movements laced with nervous energy as if the very presence of something so outdated was causing him discomfort. Finally, he cleared his throat just loud enough to draw attention. "You know," he said, his voice carrying that particular blend of casual condescension Silicon Valley had perfected. "They make watches now that can monitor your heart rate, track your sleep, even call emergency services if you fall." Chuck didn't respond immediately. He turned a page in his paperback with deliberate calm. The executive pressed on. "I mean, at your age, wouldn't you want something more reliable? That thing looks like it's seen better days." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. The flight attendant, now a few rows away, slowed her pace, sensing the shift in the air. Chuck finally looked up, his steady gaze meeting the executive's. There was no irritation in his eyes, no defensiveness, only quiet intensity. Before he could respond, someone else in the cabin spoke first. Seat 4C. Silver hair. Military straight posture. A Vietnam veteran pin on his lapel. The man had been watching the scene unfold with quiet interest, his sharp gaze fixed on Chuck's wrist. Now, he leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying the weight of recognition. "That's a Hamilton military issue, isn't it?" The cabin fell silent. Chuck's eyes met the veteran's, a flicker of understanding passing between them. An unspoken brotherhood. "Standard issue for special operations," the veteran continued. "We called them survivor watches back then." Passengers turned toward Chuck now, drawn into something far more compelling than a tech debate. The veteran smiled, shaking his head. "I haven't seen one of those in pristine condition like that for years. They made them toast through hell and high water. Each scratch tells a story." He paused. "And I bet yours has quite a few to tell." The executive's bravado evaporated. His smartwatch, once a badge of superiority, suddenly felt trivial. His fingers hovered over its screen, hesitating before silencing his notifications. The cabin was quiet, waiting. Finally, Chuck spoke. "This watch belonged to James McCarthy," he said, his voice soft but steady. "We called him Mac. He was the best radio operator in our unit. More importantly, he was my friend." A hush settled over the cabin. We were deep in enemy territory when we got pinned down. Mac spotted the enemy position first. He pushed me down just as the bullets started flying overhead. Chuck exhaled slowly. He took a hit that was meant for me. The veteran nodded solemnly. Chuck's hands, weathered but steady, brushed against the watch's scratched crystal. Before they evacuated him, Mac insisted I take his watch. "Keeps better time than me now," he said. "He didn't make it to the field hospital. This watch has been keeping time for both of us ever since." The executive swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I didn't know." Chuck nodded, his gaze kind. "The true value of something isn't in its price tag or its features. It's in the stories it carries, the lives it touches. This watch might not track my heart rate, but it reminds me every day that I'm still here, and that our time, however long we get, is precious." The young man looked down at his own watch, suddenly aware of how silent and dark its screen felt in comparison. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. And in the quiet, the lesson lingered. Some things are timeless. As the plane descended, the young executive pulled out a small notebook and began to write, glancing occasionally at Chuck's watch, as if drawing inspiration from it. Perhaps he was recording the lesson he had just learned. Or perhaps, for the first time in a long time, he was thinking about time in a way that truly mattered. As the wheels touched down, the story wasn't just about a watch anymore. It was about the value of moments and the wisdom of those who know how to honor them.